Valkyrie, do not engage. Civilian presence confirmed in the target zone. The radio crackled through Captain Brindley Thorne's helmet as she banked her A-10 Thunderbolt over the jagged ridges of Shamal Valley. Below, 381 Navy SEALs were pinned down in a killing field, ammunition running critically low, medevac impossible. She was the only pilot within 200 kilometers with enough fuel to make a difference. The same pilot who'd have been kicked out of official training 18 months ago for unsafe flight patterns and reflexes exceeding safety parameters. The same pilot who now flew missions that no Academy graduate would dare attempt. "Then I'll get close enough to know for sure," she replied, pushing the throttle forward. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines responded with a familiar roar that vibrated through her bones. In the distance, muzzle flashes lit up the valley floor like deadly fireflies. Radio chatter painted a grim picture. "Alpha Team, we're down to our last magazines. Bravo, requesting immediate CAS, over. Charlie Team has 2 KIA, need extract now." The rules of engagement were crystal clear. No strikes within 500 meters of unconfirmed civilian structures. But those weren't civilians firing AK-47s from the compound windows. Those were enemy combatants using human shields to protect themselves, while American warriors bled out in the dirt below. Brindley's father had taught her a simple truth before his own A-10 went down in Iraq. If the system fails, you become the system. Today she would become the system that brought 381 heroes home alive. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up with a sound like rolling thunder, and Valkyrie dove toward hell. But first, she needed to understand how she'd gotten here, how a pilot who couldn't pass basic flight training had become the only person capable of pulling off a mission that would violate every rule in the book. 18 months earlier, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. The morning sun blazed mercilessly across the tarmac as Captain Brindley Thorne walked toward the flight line, her blonde hair pulled back in regulation style, blue eyes already scanning the horizon with an intensity that made instructors uncomfortable. The A-10 Thunderbolt II waited like a patient predator, its distinctive twin engines and massive GAU-8 cannon giving it the appearance of a flying tank rather than a traditional fighter aircraft. "Well, well, look what the Air Force dragged in," sneered Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Blackwood, his voice carrying across the briefing room like a whip crack. The other pilot trainees turned to watch, sensing blood in the water. Blackwood was old-school military, a man who believed that combat aviation belonged to a very specific type of person, and Brindley Thorne didn't fit his narrow definition. "Miss Thorne, I've reviewed your simulator scores. Impressive numbers, I'll give you that. But flying a real aircraft isn't about pressing buttons on a computer screen." Brindley said nothing, her face maintaining the neutral expression she'd perfected over months of similar commentary. Blackwood circled her like a predator, his polished boots clicking against the concrete floor. "You see, gentlemen," he announced to the room, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is what happens when political correctness meets combat aviation. We get pilots who look good in recruitment videos but fold under real pressure." The other trainees shifted uncomfortably, even among military personnel. Blackwood's commentary pushed boundaries that most professional officers avoided. But he held rank, and questioning a superior's judgment could end careers before they started. "Your first solo flight is today," Blackwood continued, consulting his clipboard with theatrical precision. "Simple navigation exercise. Follow the programmed route, maintain altitude, and return to base. Think you can handle that without getting lost or crashing into a mountain?" Brindley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, sir. Good. Because if you can't execute basic flight operations, you have no business in a cockpit during wartime." Blackwood turned to address the group again. The A-10 Warthog is a $23 million aircraft designed to provide close air support to ground forces in hostile environments. It requires pilots with the reflexes, judgment, and intestinal fortitude to make life or death decisions while being shot at by surface-to-air missiles. Pretty faces don't stop RPGs, people. The briefing room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of jets taking off. Brindley absorbed every word, filing away each insult and dismissal for future reference. She'd heard variations of this speech from instructors who saw her gender before they saw her capabilities. But Blackwood's delivery carried a personal edge that went beyond institutional bias. 3 hours later, she was airborne for the first time in an actual A-10, feeling the massive Pratt & Whitney engines propel her into the Nevada sky. The aircraft handled differently than the simulator had suggested, more responsive in some ways, more stubborn in others. The controls required constant micro-adjustments to maintain stable flight, and the visibility from the cockpit took adjustment after months of computer-generated displays. The navigation route took her over the Mojave Desert, a predetermined path that would test her ability to maintain heading, altitude, and airspeed while navigating by landmark and instrument reference. Standard procedure for new pilots, designed to build confidence while minimizing risk to expensive aircraft and irreplaceable human lives. But 20 minutes into the flight, her radio crackled with an emergency transmission. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is a civilian aircraft, November 478, Charlie Delta. Engine failure, losing altitude rapidly. Position approximately 15 miles southwest of Nellis. Requesting immediate assistance." Brinley's training kicked in automatically. She checked her position, calculated heading and distance to the reported location, and switched to emergency frequency. "November 478, Charlie Delta. This is Air Force 779. I have your transmission. What is your current attitude and souls on board?" Air Force 779, we're at 4,000 feet and descending fast. 2 souls on board, engine completely dead, looking for anywhere to set down. Brinley could hear the fear in the civilian pilot's voice, the controlled panic of someone facing imminent catastrophe. She banked her A-10 toward the reported position, scanning the desert below for signs of aircraft in distress. The rules were clear. Student pilots were not authorized to deviate from assigned flight plans without explicit permission from the control tower. She should report the emergency and continue her training mission while more experienced pilots handled the rescue operation. Instead, she found herself diving toward the desert floor, following her instincts rather than her orders. "November 478, Charlie Delta. I have visual contact. Small twin-engine Cessna, white with blue trim. Is that your aircraft?" "Affirmative, Air Force. Thank God somebody's out here." Below, the civilian aircraft was clearly in trouble. Black smoke trailed from the port engine, and the plane's flight path showed the erratic patterns of a pilot fighting to maintain control with limited power and deteriorating altitude. The nearest suitable landing area was a stretch of relatively flat desert about 3 miles northeast of their current position. "November 478, Charlie Delta. Recommend heading 045 degrees, 3 miles to the emergency landing area. Hard-packed sand, minimal obstacles. Best option for survivable touchdown." "Air Force, I don't see it. Can you guide us in?" Brinley made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire career. She dropped her A-10 to just above the civilian aircraft, using her military jet as a pathfinder to guide the distressed Cessna towards safety. For the next 8 minutes, she performed precision flying that required skills far beyond basic training level, maintaining formation with a failing aircraft while navigating both planes toward an emergency landing zone. The Cessna touched down hard but survivably, kicking up clouds of dust as it skidded across the desert floor before coming to rest against a low rise. Both occupants walked away with minor injuries. Brinley circled overhead until she confirmed the civilian crew was mobile and responsive, then returned to Nellis to face the consequences of her unauthorized deviation from flight plan. Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood was waiting on the tarmac when she landed, his face flushed with barely controlled rage. Before she could shut down her engines completely, he was striding toward her aircraft, gesturing for her to exit the cockpit immediately. "What the hell do you think you were doing out there, Thorne?" he barked as she climbed down from the pilot's seat. "You were given explicit instructions to follow a predetermined route. Instead, you decide to play hero and risk a $23 million aircraft on some cowboy rescue mission. Sir, there was an aircraft in distress with 2 civilians aboard. I provided navigation assistance to guide them to an emergency landing area." "You provided what?" Blackwood's voice rose to a level that attracted attention from across the flight line. "You are a student pilot with fewer than 5 hours of actual flight time in this aircraft. You have no authorization to deviate from assigned training missions, no authority to engage in search and rescue operations, and absolutely no business making command decisions that put military assets at risk." Other instructors and trainees gathered at a respectful distance, sensing the drama unfolding. Brinley maintained her composure, but something in her blue eyes had hardened. 2 people are alive today because of that decision, sir. 2 people are alive despite your reckless endangerment of a combat aircraft, Blackwood shot back. The proper procedure was to report the emergency to base operations and continue your training mission while qualified personnel handled the situation. Instead, you decided that your judgment supersedes military protocol and chain of command. The circle of observers grew larger as word spread across the base. Emergency landings and student pilot controversies were rare entertainment in the daily routine of military training operations. Brinley found herself at the center of a very public disciplinary action, with her career hanging in the balance based on a split-second decision to help civilians in distress. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, his voice carrying across the tarmac, your flight patterns during this unauthorized rescue mission exceeded safe operational parameters. You were flying formation with an unstable aircraft at altitudes and distances that violated every safety protocol in the manual. That kind of reckless showboating has no place in military aviation. Sir, the formation flying was necessary to provide visual guidance to the civilian pilot. His navigation equipment was compromised, and without reference points, he would not have been able to locate the emergency landing area. Don't lecture me about flight operations, Thorne. I've been flying combat missions since before you were born. Blackwood turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. This is exactly what I have been warning about. We lower our standards to meet political quotas, and we get pilots who think rules don't apply to them, who believe their emotions and impulses matter more than discipline and protocol. The words hung in the desert air like a challenge. Brinley felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every judgment being passed on her character and capabilities. She could defend herself, could point out that her reckless flying had saved 2 lives without damage to military equipment or personnel. Instead, she chose silence, understanding that anything she said would be twisted into further evidence of her unsuitability for combat aviation. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow morning, Blackwood ordered. We'll discuss your future in this program, assuming you have one. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Brinley alone on the tarmac with her A-10. She ran her hand along the aircraft's hull, feeling the warmth of metal heated by Nevada sun and jet engines. The plane had responded perfectly to her commands during the rescue operation, had become an extension of her will in a way that surprised her with its naturalness. Whatever happened in Blackwood's office tomorrow, she knew she'd found something worth fighting for. That evening, Brinley sat in her barracks room, reviewing flight manuals and trying to predict the outcome of tomorrow's meeting. Her roommate, Lieutenant Sarah Harlow, offered moral support and practical advice. You did the right thing out there, Harlow said, settling onto her own bunk with a cup of coffee. Everyone knows it, including Blackwood. But doing the right thing and following protocol aren't always the same thing in the military. I understand that, Brinley replied, not looking up from her manual. But I can't regret helping those people. If the same situation happened tomorrow, I'd make the same choice. That's exactly what he's afraid of. Pilots who think for themselves instead of following orders. Harlow paused, considering her words carefully. You know he's going to wash you out of the program, right? This isn't about your flying skills. It's about making an example. Brinley finally looked up from her reading. Then I'll find another way. Another way to what? To become the pilot I'm supposed to be. The next morning at 800 hours sharp, Brinley knocked on Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood's office door. His voice commanded her to enter, and she found herself standing at attention before a desk covered with official paperwork and performance evaluations. Sit down, Thorne. Blackwood's tone was measured, professional, but carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. I've reviewed your training record, spoken with other instructors, and consulted with the base commander about yesterday's incident. Brinley remained silent, her hands folded in her lap, blue eyes focused on a point somewhere over Blackwood's shoulder. Your simulator scores are exceptional, he continued, consulting a folder thick with evaluation forms. Your academic performance places you in the top 5% of your class. Your physical fitness ratings exceed minimum standards by significant margins. On paper, you appear to be an ideal candidate for combat aviation. A pause hung in the air, heavy with implication. However, your actions yesterday demonstrate a fundamental incompatibility with military discipline and protocol. Combat pilots must be able to follow orders without question, to trust their commander's judgment even when their personal instincts suggest different actions. What you did yesterday suggests that you prioritize individual judgment over chain of command, personal heroics over unit cohesion. Brinley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her silence. "I am recommending your immediate removal from the A-10 training program," Blackwood announced, his words falling like hammer blows. "You will be reassigned to transport operations, where your creative interpretation of orders will pose less risk to expensive aircraft and military personnel." The recommendation hit like a physical blow. Transport operations meant cargo planes, routine supply missions, far from the combat operations that had drawn her to military aviation. It was a career death sentence disguised as reassignment. "However," Blackwood continued, "you have the right to appeal this decision through proper channels. You can request review by the base commander, submit counter-arguments, and present character witnesses on your behalf. The process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, during which time you would be assigned to ground duties pending final determination." Brinley finally spoke, her voice steady despite the devastation she felt. "Will I have access to aircraft during the appeal process? Absolutely not. You are grounded pending final determination of your status in this program. Then I respectfully decline to appeal, sir. I request immediate transfer to transport operations." Blackwood looked surprised for the first time since she'd entered his office. "You're certain about this decision? Once you accept the transfer, there's no path back to combat aviation. Your record will reflect unsuitability for fighter operations." "I understand, sir." "Very well. Report to Colonel Martinez in transport operations tomorrow morning. She'll assign you to appropriate duties." Blackwood closed her folder with obvious satisfaction. Dismissed. Brinley stood, saluted with perfect precision, and walked out of the office that had just ended her dreams of flying A-10s in combat. But as she stepped into the Nevada sunshine, her mind was already working on alternative plans. If the military wouldn't teach her to be the pilot she knew she could become, she'd teach herself. If you're feeling that righteous anger watching Brinley get dismissed by the system, smash that like button right now because justice is coming. We post verified military stories that honor the forgotten warriors every single week. Ring the bell so you never miss the moment when underdogs become legends. That afternoon, Brinley began a training regimen that would have impressed Olympic athletes. If the military wouldn't provide her with proper flight training, she'd create her own program using every resource available to her. Her approach was methodical, scientific, and completely unauthorized. At 0500 hours every morning, she laced up her running shoes and began a 10-kilometer circuit around the base perimeter, carrying a 25-kilogram pack loaded with sand and equipment. The weight wasn't arbitrary. She'd calculated that it would simulate the G-force effects experienced during high-stress maneuvering in an A-10 cockpit. While other pilots relied on centrifuge training and simulator exercises, she was conditioning her body to function under physical stress that exceeded normal training parameters. Her route took her past the flight line where A-10 sat waiting for the day's missions. She memorized every detail of their configuration, noting the position of external fuel tanks, the arrangement of hardpoints for weapons systems, the way morning light reflected off their distinctive gray paint scheme. Each aircraft had subtle differences in wear patterns, maintenance markings, and equipment configurations that told stories about their service history and current operational status. By 900 hours, she was seated in the base library with her laptop, teaching herself advanced aerodynamics and flight control systems through a combination of official manuals and engineering textbooks that she'd ordered using her own funds. The A-10's flight characteristics were unique among military aircraft, with design features that prioritize survivability and weapons delivery over speed and maneuverability. Understanding these systems at a theoretical level would give her advantages that simulator training alone couldn't provide. Her laptop contained custom software that she'd written herself, programs that modeled yaw correction algorithms for various wind and weather conditions. While other pilots learned to compensate for crosswinds through practice and experience, she was developing mathematical models that would let her calculate optimal control inputs before encountering specific conditions. The work was tedious, requiring her to input variables for aircraft weight, wind speed and direction, altitude, and dozens of other factors, but the resulting algorithms could provide split-second guidance that might save her life in combat situations. By 1700 hours, she was in the maintenance hangar, where Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez had agreed to teach her about A-10 systems in exchange for help with paperwork and inventory management. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who'd worked on A-10s since the aircraft first entered service, and his knowledge of their mechanical systems was encyclopedic. "Most pilots know how to fly these birds," he explained, while guiding her hands through the process of removing an engine cowling, "but they don't understand how they work. When something breaks in combat, you need to know not just what's wrong, but how to fix it with whatever you've got available." Under Rodriguez's patient guidance, Brindley learned to disassemble and reassemble the GAU-8 cannon until she could identify every bolt, spring, and electrical connection by touch alone. The weapon was a masterpiece of engineering, capable of firing 30mm depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute. More importantly, it was the A-10's primary reason for existence, the tool that made the aircraft lethal in close air support operations. "Feel that?" Rodriguez said, guiding her finger to a worn spot on the cannon's housing. "That's stress wear from repeated firing cycles. You can tell how many rounds this gun has fired just by examining the metal fatigue patterns. In combat, you might need to assess your weapon's condition without diagnostic equipment." Brindley absorbed every detail, building a mental library of tactile and visual references that would serve her in situations where electronic systems failed or were unavailable. She learned to identify hydraulic leaks by smell, to recognize engine problems by sound variations, to assess structural damage by running her hands along critical components. The knowledge was practical, hands-on, and completely outside the scope of normal pilot training. By 2100 hours, she was back in her barracks room, practicing breathing techniques that she'd researched in medical journals and special operations training manuals. The 4-2-4 rhythm that she'd developed involved inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 2 counts, and exhaling for 4 counts, a pattern designed to maintain optimal oxygen saturation during high-stress situations. Combined with meditation techniques adapted from military psychology texts, the exercises helped her maintain emotional equilibrium and physical performance under pressure. Her roommate Harlow watched these evening sessions with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You know this is crazy, right? All this training you're doing won't mean anything if you're flying cargo planes for the next 20 years. "It's not about the cargo planes," Brindley replied, maintaining her controlled breathing pattern. "It's about being ready for whatever comes next." "And what if nothing comes next? What if this is just elaborate preparation for a career that's never going to happen?" Brindley opened her eyes, fixing Harlow with a stare that carried absolute conviction. "Then at least I'll know I didn't give up." Above her desk, she'd taped a handwritten sign that her father had given her before leaving for his final deployment in Iraq. Colonel James Thorne had been an A-10 pilot himself, a veteran of Operation Desert Storm who'd passed his love of aviation and unwavering sense of duty to his daughter. The note contained a simple message that had become her personal motto: "If the system fails, you become the system." Her father had written those words after a mission where mechanical failures had left him flying a damaged A-10 back to base using manual controls and visual navigation alone. He'd landed safely through a combination of skill, determination, and refusal to accept that circumstances beyond his control should determine the outcome of his mission. The message he'd left for his daughter was both practical advice and philosophical guidance. When official systems and protocols failed to achieve necessary objectives, individuals had the responsibility to create their own solutions. 6 months into her unauthorized training program, Brindley had transformed herself into a pilot whose capabilities exceeded those of academy graduates who'd received official instruction. Her physical conditioning allowed her to function effectively under G-forces that would incapacitate normal humans. Her theoretical knowledge of flight systems and aerodynamics surpassed that of instructors who taught from textbooks rather than direct experience. Her mechanical expertise with A-10 systems rivaled that of veteran maintenance crews who'd spent decades working on the aircraft. More importantly, she'd developed an intuitive understanding of how to operate independently when official support systems were unavailable or inadequate. While other pilots relied on ground control for navigation, weather updates, and tactical guidance, she'd learned to gather and process information using her own resources. While others followed predetermined flight plans and operational procedures, she'd practiced making real-time decisions based on changing conditions and mission requirements. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Colonel Martinez, her commanding officer in transport operations, began assigning her to missions that required exceptional piloting skills and independent judgment. Cargo flights into disputed airspace, supply runs to remote bases with limited navigation aids, medical evacuations from hostile territory, where standard procedures would risk additional casualties. Thorne's different, Martinez confided to Lieutenant Colonel Stevens during a monthly evaluation meeting. She flies cargo planes like they're fighter jets, but with better safety margins than most of our supposedly elite pilots. Whatever training she received before coming to transport operations produced results that our normal programs don't achieve. Stevens consulted Brinley's personnel file, noting the circumstances of her transfer from combat aviation training. Blackwood flagged her for insubordination and failure to follow protocol, said she was unsuitable for military discipline. Blackwood's an excellent pilot, but he mistakes conformity for competence, Martinez replied. Thorne follows protocols when they make sense and improvises when they don't. That's exactly what we need in pilots who operate in situations where by-the-book solutions don't work. Are you recommending her for advanced training? I'm recommending that we find missions where her specific skills can be utilized. Transport operations are wasting her potential. Your curiosity about her self-taught skills is about to be rewarded. Subscribe now to see how determination beats privilege. We bring authentic combat stories that challenge everything you think you know about training. The bell ensures you catch every incredible reveal. The opportunity came 8 months later when intelligence reports indicated that A-10 squadrons in Afghanistan were experiencing pilot shortages due to extended deployments and combat stress casualties. The Air Force needed qualified close air support pilots immediately, but normal training pipelines couldn't produce replacement personnel quickly enough to meet operational demands. Colonel Martinez called Brinley into her office on a Tuesday morning, her expression serious but not disapproving. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before answering. If you had the opportunity to return to combat aviation, would you be interested? Brinley's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. Yes, ma'am. Even knowing that you'd be flying missions that academy-trained pilots consider too dangerous to attempt, even understanding that you'd be operating with minimal support and maximum risk. Especially then, ma'am, Martinez smiled for the first time since Brinley had entered the office. Good answer. There's a squadron in Afghanistan that's lost 3 pilots in the past 2 months. They need replacement personnel immediately, but they're not getting them through normal channels. Command is willing to consider unconventional candidates if they can demonstrate exceptional capabilities. She handed Brinley a folder containing mission parameters and evaluation criteria. You have 72 hours to prepare for a skills assessment that will determine whether you are qualified for immediate deployment. The test will include advanced flight maneuvers, weapon systems operation, and emergency procedures under simulated combat conditions. Pass, and you're on a transport to Kandahar by the end of the week. Fail, and you remain in cargo operations permanently. Brinley accepted the folder without opening it, her mind already racing through preparation strategies. What's the pass rate for this assessment, ma'am? Including you, 4 pilots have attempted it. The previous 3 washed out during the emergency procedures phase. Apparently, the evaluators have very specific standards about what constitutes acceptable performance under pressure. That evening, Brinley opened the assessment folder in her barracks room, spreading the documents across her desk like battle plans. The evaluation would test every skill she'd developed during her months of unauthorized training, pushing her capabilities to limits that would reveal whether her self-directed education had produced real competence or elaborate self-deception. The flight maneuver section included procedures that weren't taught in normal pilot training: formation flying with damaged aircraft, navigation using visual references alone, precision weapons delivery at altitudes and distances that violated standard safety protocols. The emergency procedures phase simulated multiple simultaneous system failures, requiring pilots to maintain aircraft control and mission effectiveness while dealing with hydraulic loss, electrical failures, and combat damage. Most challenging was the weapon systems operation test, which required demonstration of GAU-8 cannon accuracy under conditions that replicated close air support missions. Pilots would be evaluated on their ability to deliver precision fire support to friendly ground forces while avoiding collateral damage to nearby civilian structures. The margin for error was measured in meters, and mistakes would result in immediate disqualification. Brinley spent the next 72 hours in intensive preparation, reviewing every aspect of her self-taught curriculum and identifying areas where additional practice might improve her performance. She ran her physical conditioning routine twice daily, practiced breathing exercises until they became automatic reflexes, and mentally rehearsed emergency procedures until she could execute them without conscious thought. Brinley checked her oxygen monitor, the same military-grade pulse oximeter that special operations medics rely on in high-altitude missions. Advanced sensor technology provides real-time biometric data during extreme physical stress. Clinical-grade accuracy enables precision monitoring when every heartbeat matters. In life-or-death situations, this medical technology means the difference between peak performance and catastrophic failure. On assessment day, she arrived at the flight line at 0600 hours, 2 hours before the scheduled evaluation time. The test aircraft was an A-10C, the latest variant of the Thunderbolt with upgraded avionics and weapons systems. She performed a thorough pre-flight inspection, checking every component with the methodical precision that Sergeant Rodriguez had taught her months earlier. The evaluators were waiting when she finished her inspection. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, a veteran A-10 pilot with 3 combat deployments, and Major Patricia Sawyer, a weapons systems specialist who designed many of the procedures that Brinley would be tested on. Their expressions were professional but skeptical, reflecting their experience with previous candidates who had attempted and failed this assessment. "Captain Thorne," Harrison began, consulting his evaluation checklist, "you understand that this assessment will determine your immediate fitness for combat operations in a hostile environment. The standards are deliberately higher than normal training requirements because the missions you'll be flying don't allow for learning curves or second chances." "Yes, sir." "Your record indicates that you were removed from A-10 training for disciplinary reasons, then spent several months in transport operations. What makes you believe you are qualified for combat aviation when the official training program determines otherwise?" Brinley had anticipated this question and prepared her answer carefully. "Sir, I believe that real qualifications come from demonstrated capability under pressure, not from conformity to standardized procedures. The past 8 months have given me opportunities to develop skills and judgment that classroom instruction alone wouldn't provide." Major Sawyer looked up from her own checklist. "We'll see about that. Your first test is formation flying with a simulated damaged aircraft. I'll be flying the damaged bird, and your job is to guide me to a safe landing while maintaining formation discipline and avoiding obstacles. Ready?" "Yes, ma'am." The next 4 hours tested every aspect of Brinley's self-taught education. She flew formation with Sawyer's deliberately erratic aircraft, using visual references and radio communication to guide the damaged plane through a series of increasingly complex maneuvers. Her months of studying aerodynamics and control systems paid off as she anticipated and compensated for the other aircraft's unpredictable behavior, maintaining safe distances while providing navigation assistance. The emergency procedures phase pushed her A-10 to its operational limits. Evaluators simulated hydraulic failures by restricting control surface movement, forcing her to maintain flight control using manual reversion techniques that she'd practiced in the base gym. When they simulated electrical failures by shutting down primary navigation systems, she switched to visual navigation using landmarks and compass headings that she'd memorized during her morning runs around the base perimeter. The weapons systems test was the ultimate challenge. Flying at 250 feet above a simulated battlefield, she used the GAU-8 cannon to engage targets that were positioned dangerously close to friendly forces and civilian structures. The precision required exceeded anything taught in normal training programs, demanding split-second timing and mechanical accuracy that left no margin for error. Each burst from the 30mm cannon had to be precisely controlled, lasting exactly 1.5 seconds to deliver the required number of rounds without expending unnecessary ammunition. She used the breathing techniques she'd developed to maintain steady aim while dealing with the physical stress of low-altitude combat maneuvering. Her knowledge of the weapon's mechanical systems allowed her to compensate for barrel wear and ammunition variations that would affect accuracy. When the assessment concluded, Brinley landed her A-10 with the satisfaction of knowing she'd performed to the best of her abilities. Whether that performance met the evaluator's standards remained to be seen, but she'd demonstrated skills and knowledge that reflected months of dedicated preparation. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison and Major Sawyer conducted their post-flight debrief in a maintenance hangar, away from the distractions of normal base operations. Their expressions revealed nothing about her performance, maintaining the professional neutrality that prevented candidates from anticipating results. "Captain Thorne," Harrison began, "in my 15 years of evaluating pilot performance, I've never seen a more unconventional approach to combat aviation training. Your methods are completely outside normal protocols, but your results exceed the capabilities of pilots who've received standard instruction." Major Sawyer nodded her agreement. "Your weapons delivery accuracy was outstanding, especially considering that you haven't received formal close air support training. Your emergency procedures performance suggests that you understand A-10 systems better than pilots who've been flying them for years." Brinley maintained her composure, but her heart was racing with anticipation. "However," Harrison continued, "exceptional performance doesn't automatically qualify someone for combat operations. We need to know that you can function effectively as part of a military unit, following orders and supporting team objectives, even when your personal judgment suggests different actions." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Brinley understood that her answer would determine not just her assessment results, but her entire future in military aviation. "Sir, I believe that effective teamwork requires individuals who can contribute unique capabilities to achieve common objectives. My training has prepared me to support missions that standard procedures might not accomplish. I can follow orders and work within military structure while providing capabilities that other pilots might not possess." Harrison and Sawyer exchanged glances, communicating through subtle expressions that reflected years of professional collaboration. "Captain Thorne," Sawyer announced, "you are qualified for immediate deployment to combat operations in Afghanistan. Report to Colonel Martinez for transportation arrangements. Your flight to Kandahar departs Friday at 0600 hours. Relief flooded through Brinley's body, but she maintained military bearing as she accepted the assignment that represented validation of everything she'd worked toward. "Thank you, ma'am." "One more thing," Harrison added. "The squadron you're joining has lost 3 pilots in 2 months. The missions they're flying are dangerous beyond normal parameters, and the survival rate for new personnel is not encouraging. Are you certain you want this assignment?" Brinley thought of her father's words, of the hours she'd spent preparing for exactly this opportunity, of the 381 American warriors who might need her skills to survive impossible situations. "Yes, sir, absolutely certain." 4 days later, she was aboard a C-130 transport aircraft flying toward Afghanistan, her few personal possessions packed in a standard military duffel bag. Among her belongings was the handwritten note from her father: "If the system fails, you become the system." In less than 48 hours, she would have the opportunity to put that philosophy to its ultimate test. Kandahar airfield sprawled across the Afghan desert like a small city, its runways and aircraft hangars supporting combat operations across the entire region. The base housed thousands of military personnel from multiple nations, all focused on the complex mission of providing security and stability in one of the world's most challenging environments. Captain Brinley Thorne's arrival went largely unnoticed among the constant flow of personnel and equipment that characterized combat operations. She was assigned quarters in a prefabricated building that she shared with 3 other pilots, given basic orientation briefings about base procedures and security protocols, and introduced to the squadron that would determine whether her unconventional training had prepared her for real combat. The 355th Fighter Squadron operated A-10C aircraft in close air support missions throughout Afghanistan, providing fire support to ground forces engaged in counterinsurgency operations. Their mission was straightforward: respond to requests for assistance from American and Allied forces under enemy fire, deliver precision weapons that would neutralize threats without causing collateral damage, and return safely to base for the next mission. In practice, the work was far more complex and dangerous than official descriptions suggested. Enemy forces used civilian populations as shields, making precision weapons delivery extremely difficult. Mountainous terrain and unpredictable weather created flight conditions that exceeded the capabilities of standard training programs. Most challenging, the enemy possessed sophisticated weapon systems, including surface-to-air missiles that could destroy aircraft and kill pilots who made tactical mistakes. Squadron Commander Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Stone briefed Brinley on operational realities during her first day at Kandahar. Stone was a veteran pilot who'd flown A-10s in Iraq and Afghanistan for over a decade, accumulating combat experience that few pilots survived to achieve. "The missions we're flying here are different from anything you learned about in training," Stone explained, indicating positions on a large tactical map that covered one wall of the briefing room. We're operating in areas where the enemy has advanced anti-aircraft systems, providing close air support at distances and altitudes that violate peacetime safety protocols. She pointed to a region marked with red symbols indicating high-threat areas. 3 weeks ago, we lost Captain Mitchell when his aircraft took a direct hit from a surface-to-air missile. 2 weeks ago, Lieutenant Barnes was shot down by ground fire during a low-altitude attack run. Last week, Major Rodriguez ejected from his aircraft after multiple system failures caused by combat damage. Brindley studied the map, noting the concentration of threat indicators around areas where American ground forces were most active. What's the average mission duration, ma'am? Depends on the situation. Standard close air support missions last 2 to 4 hours. Emergency extractions can keep you airborne for 6 to 8 hours, depending on fuel availability and threat conditions. Stone's expression grew more serious. The mission you'll most likely face is what we call danger close air support. Friendly forces under fire, requesting immediate assistance, enemy positions within a few hundred meters of American troops. The term danger close referred to situations where weapons delivery required precision that exceeded normal safety margins. Pilots had to deliver effective fire support without causing casualties among the forces they were trying to protect, often while operating under enemy fire themselves. How many of these missions result in complications? Brindley asked. Define complications. If you mean mission failure, about 15%. If you mean aircraft damage, about 60%. If you mean pilot casualties, about 12% over the past 6 months. Stone met Brindley's eyes directly. Those statistics are classified, by the way. Public information suggests much lower risk levels. Brindley nodded her understanding. Military operations always carried risks that weren't reflected in official communications, and pilots needed accurate information to make informed decisions about tactics and procedures. Your first mission is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Stone continued. You'll be flying with Captain David Park, one of our most experienced pilots. Consider it orientation training, an opportunity to observe actual combat operations before taking on independent missions. The briefing concluded with detailed information about aircraft assignments, maintenance schedules, and communication procedures. Brindley would be flying A-10C tail number 817, an aircraft with over 2,000 combat hours and battle damage repairs that testified to its durability under hostile conditions. That evening, she conducted a thorough inspection of her assigned aircraft, examining every system with the attention to detail that Sergeant Rodriguez had taught her during their maintenance hangar sessions. The A-10's titanium hull showed scars from small arms fire and shrapnel impacts, but the aircraft's legendary survivability had allowed it to return safely from missions that would have destroyed less robust planes. Her inspection revealed modifications that weren't present on stateside aircraft: additional armor plating around critical systems, enhanced electronic warfare equipment to counter surface-to-air missile threats, and ammunition loading configurations optimized for close air support rather than general combat operations. The aircraft had been adapted specifically for the threats and mission requirements of Afghanistan operations. The life insurance documents in her flight bag reflected coverage every combat pilot maximizes before dangerous deployments. Enhanced benefits for high-risk military operations provide triple protection for families. 91% of fighter pilots increase coverage before overseas assignments. Protecting loved ones matters as much as completing the mission successfully. At 400 hours the next morning, Brindley was awakened by the sound of aircraft engines and radio chatter that indicated emergency scramble procedures. She dressed quickly and made her way to the operations center, where she found Captain Park and other pilots receiving briefings about an urgent close air support mission. SEALs under fire in the Shamal Valley, the operations officer announced, indicating positions on the tactical display. They have been engaged for the past 3 hours. Ammunition running low, medevac impossible due to enemy fire. We need immediate close air support to break contact and allow extraction. Park turned to Brindley. Welcome to combat operations. Ready for some on-the-job training? Yes, sir. Good, because this one's going to test everything you think you know about flying A-10s. They were airborne within 30 minutes, flying toward the Shamal Valley as dawn broke over the Afghan mountains. Radio chatter from ground forces painted a picture of American troops pinned down by enemy fire, unable to maneuver or retreat without air support to suppress hostile positions. As they approached the valley, Park began explaining tactical considerations that weren't covered in normal training programs. Enemy forces are positioned in compounds that contain civilian populations. We need to provide effective fire support without causing collateral damage that would create diplomatic complications. Brindley scanned the terrain below, noting the complexity of the tactical situation. Friendly forces were positioned in low ground surrounded by elevated positions that provided enemy fighters with significant advantages. The compound structures were traditional Afghan construction, making it difficult to distinguish between military targets and civilian shelters. "How do we confirm target identification?" she asked. "Experience, judgment, and communication with ground forces," Park replied. "The SEALs will mark enemy positions with laser designators, but you need to verify targets independently before engaging. One mistake could kill civilians and end your career." Their radio crackled with transmission from the ground. "Viper 1-1, this is SEAL Team 6. We have multiple enemy positions engaging us from compound structures bearing 270 degrees. Distance 400 meters. Request immediate close air support. Danger close authorization granted." Park acknowledged the transmission and began his attack approach, demonstrating techniques that Brindley had never seen in training scenarios. He flew his A-10 at extremely low altitude, using terrain features to mask his approach until the last possible moment. His weapons delivery was precise beyond anything she'd witnessed, placing 30mm cannon rounds within meters of friendly forces while avoiding damage to civilian structures. "Your turn," Park announced after completing his attack run. "Same target area, but enemy forces have shifted position. Show me what you learned in that assessment back in Nevada." Brindley felt her pulse quicken as she began her own approach. Everything she'd trained for during those months of unauthorized preparation was about to be tested under actual combat conditions. The breathing techniques, the mechanical knowledge, the precision flying skills, all would be evaluated by an enemy that would kill her if she made mistakes. She dove toward the valley floor, feeling the A-10 respond to her control inputs with the familiarity of long practice. The aircraft's systems functioned exactly as she'd expected, based on her theoretical studies and mechanical training. Most importantly, her self-taught skills proved adequate for conditions that exceeded normal training parameters. Her first burst from the GAU-8 cannon struck exactly where she'd intended, suppressing enemy fire and allowing the pinned SEAL team to reposition toward better defensive positions. Radio transmission from the ground confirmed successful target engagement without collateral damage. "Nice shooting, Valkyrie," came the voice of the SEAL team leader. "You just saved our backsides down here." As they flew back toward Kandahar, Park provided feedback on her performance that validated months of preparation. "That was outstanding flying for a first combat mission. Your precision was better than pilots with months of combo experience. Where did you learn to deliver weapons accurately under those conditions?" "Self-taught, sir. I had access to excellent instructors, but they weren't part of the official training program." Park studied her thoughtfully. "Well, whatever program you created for yourself, it worked. You're ready for independent missions." Back at base, Brindley filed mission reports and participated in debriefing sessions that analyzed every aspect of the morning's operations. Her performance had been noted by squadron leadership, and word spread quickly that the new pilot possessed capabilities that exceeded normal expectations. Over the following weeks, she flew increasingly complex missions that tested her skills against the full range of threats and challenges that characterized Afghanistan operations. Each flight provided opportunities to apply her self-taught knowledge under conditions that revealed whether her unconventional education had produced real competence. The missions were dangerous, sometimes terrifying, always demanding. But every time she climbed into the cockpit of her A-10, she felt the presence of her father's wisdom. If the system fails, you become the system. In the skies over Afghanistan, she was becoming the system that brought American warriors home alive. 2 months after arriving at Kandahar, she received word that would test everything she'd learned about being the system when official systems failed. 381 Navy SEALs were trapped in a valley where no rescue was possible using standard procedures. She was the only pilot within fuel range capable of attempting a mission that would violate every rule in the book, while trying to save lives that conventional tactics couldn't reach. The radio crackled in her helmet as she approached the coordinates. "Valkyrie, do not engage. Civilian presence confirmed in the target zone." She looked down at the valley where American warriors were fighting for their lives, thought of her father's final lesson, and made a decision that would define her forever. "Then I'll get close enough to know for sure." The radio frequency erupted with overlapping transmissions as Brinley dove her A-10 toward the Shamal Valley. Ground control, squadron command, and higher headquarters all attempted to countermand her decision simultaneously, creating a cacophony of official protests that she systematically ignored while focusing on the tactical situation unfolding below. Valkyrie, this is Kandahar Control. You are ordered to abort your approach and return to base immediately. Acknowledge. Valkyrie, this is Colonel Stone. Stand down and await further instructions. Do not engage without positive target identification. All aircraft, this is CENTCOM. The valley is declared off-limits due to civilian presence. Any pilot engaging targets in that area will face court-martial proceedings. Brinley switched her radio to the emergency frequency used by ground forces, cutting through the command structure chaos to establish direct communication with the Americans who were actually under fire. Her months of self-taught preparation had included studying special operations communication protocols, understanding that successful close air support required pilots to work directly with ground forces rather than through multiple layers of command bureaucracy. SEAL Team 6, this is Valkyrie. I have visual contact with your position. Request immediate situation report and target marking. The response came through radio static filled with the sound of automatic weapons fire and explosions. Valkyrie, this is SEAL Team Leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. We have 381 personnel pinned down in a box canyon with limited ammunition and no extraction route. Enemy forces are using civilian compounds as firing positions, making it impossible for standard close air support protocols. Brinley banked her A-10 in a wide circle, studying the terrain and tactical situation, with eyes trained by months of analyzing complex scenarios. The SEALs were positioned in low ground surrounded by elevated firing positions that provided enemy forces with significant tactical advantages. Multiple compounds containing civilian populations were interspersed with military targets, creating the exact type of scenario that rules of engagement were designed to prevent. Chief Webb, can you provide laser designation for confirmed military targets? Negative, Valkyrie. The laser designator was damaged in the initial engagement. We're marking targets with signal mirrors and verbal direction only. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without laser guidance systems, weapons delivery would require visual target identification and manual aiming that pushed precision requirements beyond normal safety margins. Any mistakes could result in civilian casualties that would create diplomatic crises and end military careers. More critically, the SEALs were running out of time. Radio reports indicated that enemy forces were maneuvering to surround the trapped Americans, cutting off any possibility of ground extraction. Air support was their only hope for survival, but providing that support would require violating direct orders from multiple levels of command authority. Brinley thought of her father's words. If the system fails, you become the system. The official system was failing 381 American warriors who needed immediate assistance. Command structure protocols were prioritizing political considerations over the lives of personnel who had volunteered to risk everything for their country. Chief Webb, I'm going to make a low pass to assess target positions. Keep your people down and be ready to mark enemy locations when I call for them. She pushed her A-10 into a steep dive, descending to 250 feet above the valley floor while enemy fire erupted from multiple positions. Tracer rounds streaked past her cockpit, and she heard the distinctive crack of bullets striking her aircraft's armored hull. The sound was familiar from her preparation research, but experiencing it firsthand required the breathing techniques and stress management skills she'd developed during those early morning training sessions. The valley spread below her like a deadly puzzle. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in compounds that were indistinguishable from civilian structures, using human shields to protect themselves while engaging American forces. Traditional close air support doctrine would require positive identification of military targets before weapons release, but such identification was impossible under current conditions. Her first pass revealed the tactical complexity that had trapped the SEALs. Enemy forces controlled high ground on three sides of the canyon, with interlocking fields of fire that prevented American movement in any direction. The fourth side was blocked by a narrow defile that could be easily defended by small numbers of enemy fighters. Valkyrie, this is Chief Webb. Enemy positions are marked with signal mirrors at your 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 7 o'clock positions. Distance to friendly forces approximately 50 to 80 meters. 50 to 80 meters, the distance was far closer than anything covered in normal training programs, requiring precision that exceeded official bus safety protocols by significant margins. One miscalculation could kill the Americans she was trying to protect. Brindley climbed back to attack altitude, calculating approach angles and weapons delivery solutions that would neutralize enemy positions without causing collateral damage. Her self-taught understanding of ballistics and aerodynamics provided computational advantages that academy-trained pilots wouldn't possess, but even optimal calculations required execution skills that could only be validated under actual combat conditions. Her radio crackled with renewed protests from command authority. "Valkyrie, you are ordered to disengage immediately. Return to base for debriefing and disciplinary action." Instead of responding, she switched to a different frequency and contacted her squadron mate who was flying patrol in a different sector. "Viper 2, this is Valkyrie. I need you to relay a message to Colonel Stone." "Go ahead, Valkyrie. Tell the Colonel that I understand the consequences of my actions, but 381 Americans are going to die if someone doesn't take action immediately. I'm accepting full responsibility for violating ROE and direct orders. Record this transmission for the investigation that will follow." "Valkyrie, are you certain about this?" Brindley looked down at the valley where muzzle flashes indicated continuing combat between American forces and enemy fighters using civilian shields. "Roger that, Viper 2. I'm certain." She rolled her A-10 into attack position, aligning her aircraft with the first target area that Chief Webb had marked with signal mirrors. The GAU-8 cannon spun up with its characteristic whine, 30mm depleted uranium rounds chambered and ready for precision delivery. Her approach took her directly over enemy positions, at altitude and speed, that made her aircraft a target for every fighter in the valley. Surface-to-air missile warning systems activated, as enemy forces attempted to lock onto her aircraft with portable missile systems. She deployed chaff and flares while maintaining her attack heading, trusting her aircraft's survivability systems and her own piloting skills to keep her alive long enough to complete her mission. The first burst from her cannon lasted exactly 1.5 seconds, delivering 42 rounds to a compound where enemy fighters had been engaging SEAL positions with heavy machine guns. The depleted uranium rounds struck with devastating effect, neutralizing the threat while avoiding damage to adjacent civilian structures. "Direct hit, Valkyrie." Chief Webb's voice carried relief and admiration. "Enemy position neutralized, no civilian casualties observed." Brindley banked hard left, avoiding ground fire while lining up her next target. The precision required was extraordinary, demanding split-second timing and mechanical accuracy that left no margin for error. Each burst had to be perfectly controlled, delivering just enough firepower to neutralize threats without creating collateral damage that would justify the command structure's concerns about civilian casualties. Her second attack run targeted a group of fighters positioned in a residential compound where families were being used as human shields. The tactical problem was nearly impossible: neutralize enemy combatants without harming civilians who were being held in the same structures. The solution required flying lower and slower than any sane pilot would attempt, using visual confirmation to identify specific individuals carrying weapons while avoiding those who were clearly non-combatants. Her approach took her to 150 feet above ground level, well within range of small arms fire that could damage critical aircraft systems. Enemy fighters fired desperately at her approaching aircraft, their muzzle flashes providing the positive identification she needed to distinguish combatants from civilians. Her cannon burst was precisely placed, striking only the positions where weapons fire originated while leaving the rest of the compound undamaged. "Another direct hit, Valkyrie. You're threading the needle down here." But her success was attracting increasingly sophisticated opposition. Enemy forces were coordinating their anti-aircraft efforts, using communication systems to vector surface-to-air missiles toward her aircraft while she was engaged in attack runs. Her warning systems indicated multiple missile locks as she climbed away from her second target. A shoulder-fired missile streaked past her starboard wing, close enough that she felt the heat signature through her cockpit canopy. The near miss reminded her that enemy forces possessed weapons capable of destroying her aircraft and ending her mission before all American forces could be extracted. Your curiosity about her self-taught skills is about to be rewarded. Subscribe now to see how determination beats privilege. We bring authentic combat stories that challenge everything you think you know about training. The bell ensures you catch every incredible reveal. Her third attack run targeted the most dangerous enemy position, a group of fighters with heavy weapons who were positioned in a mosque complex where civilian casualties would create international diplomatic crises. The target represented everything that rules of engagement were designed to prevent: military necessity conflicting with political consequences. Chief Webb's voice was urgent. "Valkyrie, that position has our guys pinned down completely. They're using RPs and heavy machine guns from inside religious structures. We can't move until that threat is neutralized." The tactical problem was unsolvable using conventional doctrine. Attacking religious structures would violate multiple international laws and create propaganda victories for enemy forces. But failing to attack would result in American casualties that could be prevented through decisive action. Brinley made a decision that reflected her father's philosophy. When official systems failed to protect American lives, individuals had the responsibility to become the system that succeeded. She would accept the consequences of her actions, but she would not allow American warriors to die because of political considerations. Her approach to the mosque complex required flying directly through concentrated ground fire, while maintaining the precision necessary to strike only the specific areas where enemy fighters were positioned. The building's architecture provided multiple positions where combatants could hide while using religious symbolism to deter air attacks. She flew her A-10 at 90 feet above ground level, identifying muzzle flashes that revealed enemy positions while avoiding areas where civilians might be sheltering. Her cannon burst was surgically precise, striking only the tower and courtyard areas where heavy weapons were located, while leaving the main religious structures undamaged. The effect was immediate and decisive. Enemy heavy weapons fire ceased, allowing the trapped SEALs to begin movement toward more defensible positions. Chief Webb's radio transmission carried profound relief. "Valkyrie, that was outstanding. The pressure's off our position. We can start moving toward extraction points." But Brinley's relief was short-lived. Her aircraft's warning systems activated with an urgency that indicated serious problems developing. Multiple indicator lights illuminated her instrument panel, showing system failures that threatened her ability to continue flight operations. "Hydraulic pressure loss detected," her aircraft's automated warning system announced. "Hydro B system showing critical failure." The hydraulic system failure was exactly the type of emergency that her months of self-preparation had focused on. Without hydraulic assistance, flying the A-10 would require physical strength and manual control techniques that exceeded normal pilot training. Her muscle conditioning and breathing exercises were about to be tested under conditions where failure meant death. She attempted to maintain level flight as hydraulic pressure continued dropping, feeling her control stick become increasingly heavy and unresponsive. The aircraft began losing altitude despite her attempts to maintain climbing altitude, descending toward terrain that offered no suitable emergency landing areas. "Chief Webb, this is Valkyrie. I'm experiencing multiple system failures and may need to eject. Continue your extraction without waiting for additional air support." "Negative, Valkyrie. We still have enemy positions that haven't been neutralized. Without your support, we won't make it to extraction points." The situation had become desperate for everyone involved. The SEALs needed continued air support to survive their extraction, but her aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control as hydraulic systems failed completely. Soon she would face a choice between ejecting to save her own life or attempting to continue mission support despite mechanical failures that made flight extremely dangerous. Her instruments showed complete hydraulic system failure, forcing her to switch to manual reversion mode that required pure physical strength to control aircraft movement. The technique she'd practiced during those early morning gym sessions was now the only thing keeping her airborne, with her aircraft's fate depending entirely on her ability to muscle the control stick through movements that normally required hydraulic assistance. The physical demands were extraordinary. Each control input required strength that most pilots didn't possess, with arm and shoulder muscles working against control forces that threatened to overpower her grip. Her breathing techniques became essential for maintaining oxygen flow to muscles that were operating under extreme stress conditions. "Come on, bird," she whispered to her aircraft, feeling the A-10 respond sluggishly to her manual control inputs. "We're not done yet." The aircraft was losing altitude steadily, despite her efforts to maintain level flight. She calculated that she had perhaps 10 minutes of flying time remaining before mechanical limitations would force her to eject or attempt an emergency landing. Either choice would end her mission and leave the SEALs without air support during their most vulnerable phase. Instead, she chose a third option that reflected her self-taught philosophy. If the system fails, you become the system. Her aircraft's hydraulic systems had failed, but she could become the hydraulic system through physical strength and manual control. Her flight instruments had become unreliable, but she could navigate using visual references and compass headings that she'd memorized during her preparation training. A surface-to-air missile launch was detected by her remaining electronic warfare systems, providing just enough warning for her to attempt evasive maneuvers using manual flight controls. The missile detonated close enough to her aircraft that shrapnel struck her starboard engine, causing additional system failures that threatened to end her mission immediately. Her starboard engine began producing irregular power, with warning indicators showing overheating and potential fire conditions. Smoke began entering her cockpit, reducing visibility while creating respiratory hazards that required her to switch to emergency oxygen systems. The cumulative effect of hydraulic failure, engine damage, and smoke inhalation was pushing her toward the limits of human endurance. But she could still hear Chief Webb's radio transmissions, describing enemy positions that threatened SEAL extraction efforts, and she knew that abandoning her mission would condemn 381 Americans to death or capture. Chief Webb, I'm still operational but running on emergency systems. Give me locations for remaining threats. Valkyrie, you're trailing smoke and losing altitude. You need to get out of here while you still can. Negative, Chief. I didn't come this far to quit now. Mark your targets. Her fourth attack run was flown entirely on manual controls, with engine power fluctuating unpredictably and smoke limiting her visibility to minimal levels. The target was a group of enemy fighters positioned in a compound that controlled the only exit route from the valley, making their neutralization essential for successful SEAL extraction. Flying her damaged A-10 at low altitude through concentrated ground fire, while using manual controls required skills that no training program taught. She relied entirely on physical conditioning, breathing techniques, and mechanical knowledge that she'd developed through months of unauthorized preparation. Her cannon burst was delivered with mechanical precision despite aircraft systems that were failing around her. The depleted uranium rounds struck their intended targets with devastating accuracy, neutralizing the final enemy position that had been preventing SEAL movement toward extraction points. Direct hit, Valkyrie. The exit route is clear. All SEAL elements are moving toward extraction now, but her success came at a cost that made continuation of flight operations nearly impossible. Her starboard engine was now producing flames visible from her cockpit, while hydraulic fluid leaking from damaged systems was creating fire hazards that threatened catastrophic aircraft loss. Her remaining engine was showing signs of damage from shrapnel impacts, with power output declining steadily as internal components failed under stress. Soon, she would face the choice between ejecting immediately or attempting to maintain flight long enough to ensure complete SEAL extraction. Emergency procedures called for immediate ejection when engine fires threatened aircraft structural integrity. But ejecting would leave her aircraft to crash in the valley where it could kill American forces or provide propaganda value to enemy fighters. More importantly, her mission wasn't complete until every SEAL had reached safe extraction points. She made a decision that would define her legacy as a pilot. Instead of ejecting, she would attempt an emergency landing that would position her aircraft to provide final protection for SEAL extraction, while minimizing risk to friendly forces. The emergency landing site was a narrow strip of relatively flat ground at the valley's eastern end, where her aircraft could serve as a shield between extracting SEALs and remaining enemy positions. Landing a damaged A-10 with manual controls on unprepared terrain was essentially impossible, but her self-taught skills provided techniques that academy-trained pilots wouldn't attempt. Chief Webb, I'm coming in for an emergency landing at your extraction point. My bird can provide cover while your people get out. Valkyrie, that's a suicide run. The terrain won't support aircraft landing. Roger that, Chief, but it'll support aircraft sliding. She lined up her approach using visual references and compass headings, with her damaged aircraft barely maintaining controlled flight. The landing would be a controlled crash, using the A-10's legendary durability to absorb impact forces while positioning the aircraft to protect withdrawing American forces. Her final approach took her directly over enemy positions that continued firing at her aircraft despite its obvious distress. Several more impacts struck her fuselage, causing additional system failures that made controlled flight even more difficult. The landing impact was violent beyond anything simulated in training programs. Her A-10 struck the ground at 120 knots, far faster than normal landing speed, with landing gear that had been damaged by ground fire. The aircraft bounced twice before settling into a belly slide that carried it 70 meters across rocky terrain. During the slide, her aircraft's hull absorbed tremendous punishment while protecting the critical systems that kept her alive. The titanium armor that made A-10s legendary for survivability prevented penetration by rocks and debris that would have destroyed less robust aircraft. When her aircraft finally stopped moving, it was positioned exactly where she'd intended, between the SEAL extraction point and remaining enemy positions, providing cover that allowed the final American personnel to reach helicopters that were approaching for pickup. If that hydraulic failure shocked you, subscribe immediately because the real test is coming. Our channel exposes what happens when systems fail and heroes step up. Hit the bell to witness courage under impossible pressure. Chief Webb's voice came through her radio with emotion that professional warriors rarely displayed. Valkyrie, that was the most magnificent piece of flying I've ever witnessed. You just saved 381 American lives. Brindley sat in her smoking cockpit, feeling the adrenaline effects beginning to subside as the immediate crisis passed. Her aircraft was destroyed, her career was probably over, and she faced court-martial proceedings for violating direct orders from multiple levels of command authority. But 381 Navy SEALs were climbing aboard extraction helicopters instead of being killed or captured because she'd chosen to become the system when official systems failed to protect American lives. Emergency response teams reached her aircraft within minutes, helping her exit the cockpit and providing medical evaluation for injuries sustained during the crash landing. Her physical condition was surprisingly good, with only minor cuts and bruises despite the violent impact that had destroyed her aircraft. The base commander's helicopter arrived to collect her for immediate transport back to Kandahar, where she would face questioning about her decision to violate rules of engagement and direct orders. The flight back to base gave her time to consider the consequences of actions that had saved American lives while ending her military career. Colonel Stone was waiting when she arrived at base operations, her expression unreadable as she watched Brindley exit the helicopter. The squadron commander had been monitoring radio transmissions throughout the mission, understanding both the tactical necessity of Brindley's actions and the serious violations of military protocol that had occurred. Captain Thorne, you are relieved of flight status pending investigation of your actions in the Shamal Valley. Report to the base legal office immediately for questioning about violations of direct orders and rules of engagement. Yes, ma'am. For the record, Stone added quietly, what you did out there was the finest example of combat aviation I've seen in 20 years of military service. But it was also a clear violation of everything we are taught about following orders and military discipline. The legal proceedings began within hours of her return to base. Military investigators interviewed her extensively about every aspect of the mission, from her decision to ignore direct orders to the specific techniques she'd used for precision weapons delivery under extreme conditions. Major Patricia Hartwell, the investigating officer, was thorough and professional as she documented violations that could result in court-martial proceedings and dismissal from military service. Captain Thorne, you understand that your actions today violated direct orders from Squadron Command, base operations, and CENTCOM headquarters? Yes, ma'am. You also understand that engaging targets in close proximity to civilian populations without positive identification constitutes a violation of rules of engagement that could result in criminal charges? Yes, ma'am. Given these serious violations, can you explain your decision to continue mission operations despite explicit orders to disengage? Brindley had prepared her answer during the flight back to base, knowing that her response would determine whether her actions were viewed as heroic or criminal. Ma'am, I believe that immediate action was necessary to prevent loss of American lives, and that following normal procedures would result in casualties that could be prevented through tactical initiative. So, you're claiming that your judgment superseded the judgment of superior officers who had access to intelligence information that you did not possess? No, ma'am. I'm stating that I accepted responsibility for taking action when official procedures were inadequate to protect American personnel who needed immediate assistance. Major Hartwell made notes in her investigation file, documenting responses that would be analyzed by military lawyers and command authority to determine appropriate disciplinary action. The investigation continued for several hours, covering every detail of the mission and the decision-making process that had led to successful rescue of 381 SEALs. Brinley's laptop contained flight simulation software from an accelerated pilot certification program designed for military to civilian career transitions. 18 months from combat aviation to commercial airline certification. 89% placement rate with major carriers. This professional advancement program transforms military pilots into high-paid civilian aviators through specialized training protocols. While legal proceedings continued, word of her actions spread throughout the base and beyond. The SEAL personnel she'd rescued provided detailed statements about the tactical situation that had required immediate air support, confirming that standard procedures would have resulted in significant American casualties. Chief Petty Officer Webb submitted an official report that provided tactical context for her decision to violate orders. Captain Thorne's actions prevented the loss of 381 American personnel who were facing imminent capture or death. Her precision weapons delivery and emergency landing procedures demonstrated exceptional skill and courage under impossible conditions. Similar statements came from other SEAL team leaders who had witnessed her performance during the mission. Their unanimous assessment was that her violations of protocol had been justified by tactical necessity and had resulted in successful mission completion that wouldn't have been possible using standard procedures. The investigation also revealed technical aspects of her performance that surprised military aviation experts. Her ability to fly manual reversion after complete hydraulic failure exceeded capabilities demonstrated by test pilots under controlled conditions. Her precision weapons delivery at distances that violated safety protocols had achieved accuracy levels that were considered impossible under combat stress. Flight data recovered from her aircraft showed control inputs and aircraft performance that military engineers analyzed to understand how she'd maintained controlled flight under conditions that should have resulted in immediate aircraft loss. Her technique revealed innovations that weren't taught in any official training program. How did you develop the skills necessary to fly manual reversion under combat conditions? Major Hartwell asked during a follow-up interview. Self-taught preparation, ma'am. I studied aircraft systems and practiced physical conditioning that prepared me for emergency situations. Self-taught? You're saying that unofficial training provided capabilities that exceed official programs? I'm saying that I prepared myself for situations that normal training doesn't address. The investigation expanded to include analysis of her unconventional training methods and the results they'd produced. Military training experts were brought in to evaluate whether her self-directed education could be incorporated into official programs that would improve pilot performance under extreme conditions. 3 days after the mission, she was summoned to a meeting with Base Command Authority that would determine her fate. Colonel Rebecca Martinez, the base commander, had reviewed all investigation materials and witness statements before reaching her decision about disciplinary action. The meeting took place in a conference room where Brinley faced a panel of senior officers who would decide whether her actions constituted heroism or criminal misconduct. The atmosphere was formal, professional, and charged with implications that would affect her future and possibly influence military doctrine regarding rules of engagement. Captain Thorne, Colonel Martinez began, you have been investigated for multiple violations of military protocol, including disobedience of direct orders, violation of rules of engagement, and unauthorized deviation from assigned mission parameters. Yes, ma'am. The investigation has also documented that your actions resulted in successful rescue of 381 American personnel who would likely have been killed or captured if standard procedures had been followed. Martinez consulted her file before continuing. Your case presents an unusual situation where clear violations of military discipline produced results that prevented significant American casualties. This creates a precedential problem that affects how we balance obedience to orders with tactical initiative under extreme conditions. The silence in the conference room was complete except for the hum of air conditioning and distant sounds of base operations. Brinley understood that the decision being made would determine not just her personal future, but potentially influence how military doctrine addressed similar situations in the future. The recommendation from SEAL Team 6 leadership is that you should receive commendation for exceptional performance under combat conditions. The recommendation from Command Authority is that you should face court-martial proceedings for violations of direct orders. The recommendation from aviation specialists is that your techniques should be studied and potentially incorporated into advanced pilot training. Martinez paused, allowing the complexity of the situation to settle before announcing her decision. After careful consideration of all factors involved, I am recommending that you be restored to full flight status with commendation for exceptional performance during combat rescue operations. Your violations of protocol will be noted in your permanent record, but no disciplinary action will be taken given the extraordinary circumstances and successful mission outcome. Relief flooded through Brinley's body, but she maintained military bearing as she processed the implications of the decision. She would continue flying combat missions, her techniques would be studied for potential incorporation into training programs, and her actions would be officially recognized as appropriate under the extreme circumstances she'd faced. However, Martinez continued, you should understand that this decision sets no precedent for future situations. Military discipline and chain of command remain essential for operational effectiveness. Your case was exceptional and should not be interpreted as authorization for other personnel to violate orders based on personal judgment. I understand, ma'am. One more thing. Your flying techniques and training methods have attracted attention from Pentagon aviation specialists. You may be asked to participate in advanced training development programs that could benefit pilot education across all service branches. Feeling that satisfaction watching her prove everyone wrong? Subscribe for more stories where skill conquers prejudice. We showcase real military vindication that makes you believe in human potential. The bell guarantees you'll never miss another triumph of the human spirit. 6 months later, Captain Brinley Thorne walked across the Kandahar flight line toward an A-10C that bore distinctive nose art created by base maintenance personnel. The aircraft had been specially assigned to her after her previous plane was destroyed during the Shamal Valley mission, and the maintenance crew had decorated it with artwork that reflected her unique status. The nose art depicted a Valkyrie figure with flowing blonde hair, carrying both a sword and a wrench, symbols that represented her combination of combat effectiveness and mechanical expertise. Below the image, painted in precise military lettering, were the words, Valkyrie, self-taught. The designation had been approved by Squadron Command as recognition of her unconventional path to combat aviation excellence. Her story had become legendary within military aviation circles, inspiring other pilots to develop training methods that exceeded standard program requirements. Lieutenant Colonel Stone approached as she completed her pre-flight inspection, carrying mission orders for another close air support operation in hostile territory. The squadron commander's expression showed the professional respect that Brinley had earned through exceptional performance under impossible conditions. Ready for another mission, Valkyrie? Always ready, ma'am. Good, because we've got American forces in contact who need the kind of precision support that only you seem capable of providing. Brinley accepted the mission folder while running her hand along her aircraft's hull, feeling the familiar texture of metal that had been manufactured to survive the worst that combat could inflict. The A-10 was a machine designed for pilots who understood that sometimes becoming the system was the only way to make systems work. Her father's words echoed in her memory as she climbed into the cockpit. If the system fails, you become the system. She'd learned to become the hydraulic system when mechanical systems failed, to become the navigation system when electronic systems were damaged, to become the decision-making system when command protocols were inadequate for protecting American lives. As she started her engines and taxied toward the runway, she thought about the 381 SEALs who were alive because she'd chosen to violate orders rather than allow systems failures to determine mission outcomes. Each of those warriors had families who would never know how close they'd come to losing someone they loved. Her radio crackled with transmission from the control tower. Valkyrie, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting out there. Roger Tower. Valkyrie is airborne. The A-10 lifted off from Kandahar's runway with the familiar roar of engines that had carried her through months of combat missions, where self-taught skills proved superior to academy training. Each flight provided opportunities to apply innovations that were now being studied by Pentagon specialists for incorporation into advanced pilot education programs. As she climbed toward mission altitude, the Afghan landscape spread below her like a tactical puzzle that required constant adaptation and creative problem-solving. Every mission brought situations that couldn't be resolved using standard procedures, demanding pilots who could think independently while maintaining mission effectiveness. Her secure radio activated with transmission from ground forces requesting immediate close air support. Another crisis was developing, where American lives depended on tactical aviation delivered with precision that exceeded normal safety margins. Another opportunity to become the system that succeeded when official systems were inadequate. Valkyrie, this is the ground unit in contact. We need immediate assistance. Enemy forces are using civilian shields in compounds approximately 200 meters from our position. The tactical problem was familiar. Precision weapons delivery required to neutralize threats without causing collateral damage that would create diplomatic complications. The solution would require flying skills, judgment, and mechanical knowledge that reflected months of self-directed preparation for situations that training programs didn't address. Ground unit, this is Valkyrie. I have visual contact with your position. Stand by for precision, close air support. She banked her A-10 toward the target area, feeling the aircraft respond to control inputs with the familiarity of long partnership. The plane had become an extension of her will, a tool that amplified capabilities she'd developed through determination and unconventional training methods. Below, American warriors needed assistance that only she could provide. Official procedures were inadequate for the tactical complexity they faced, but she'd learned to become the system that succeeded when systems failed. The GAU-8 cannon spun up with its distinctive whine as she dove toward combat that would test every skill she'd developed during her journey from rejected trainee to combat aviation specialist. Her father's wisdom guided her actions as she prepared to engage targets that required precision beyond normal human capabilities. If the system fails, you become the system. Today, she was the system that brought American heroes home alive. The mission continued with split-second timing and surgical precision that had become her trademark. Each weapon's delivery was calculated and executed with accuracy that military aviation specialists were still attempting to understand and replicate. Her techniques were being studied by Pentagon researchers who wanted to determine whether self-taught methods could enhance official training programs. Radio chatter from ground forces confirmed successful target engagement without civilian casualties, adding another chapter to a combat record that was becoming legendary within special operations communities. SEAL teams specifically requested her for missions that other pilots considered too dangerous or technically demanding to attempt. When the mission concluded and she returned to Kandahar, maintenance crews gathered around her aircraft to assess battle damage and prepare for the next sortie. They had learned to expect evidence of close calls and near misses that reflected the extreme conditions where she operated most effectively. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, now serving as her primary maintenance supervisor, inspected her aircraft with the thoroughness that their collaboration demanded. "How'd she handle today, Captain?" "Like always, Sergeant. She took everything they threw at us and kept fighting. That's what she's built for, and that's what you're built for too." The partnership between pilot and aircraft had evolved during months of combat operations, where mechanical reliability and pilot skill were tested under conditions that revealed the true capabilities of both human and machine. Each mission provided data that improved their effectiveness as a team. Evening briefings analyzed tactical innovations that emerged from her self-taught approach to combat aviation. Squadron pilots studied her techniques, trying to understand how unofficial training had produced capabilities that exceeded results from expensive government programs. Lieutenant Sarah Harlow, her former roommate who'd transferred to Kandahar 3 months earlier, approached after the briefing session. "I still can't believe you did it. All that crazy training you were doing back in Nevada actually worked. It worked because it had to work. The alternative was accepting limitations that would prevent me from doing the job I was meant to do. What's next? Pentagon training development? Test pilot school? Command track?" Brindley looked out at the flight line where her A-10 sat waiting for tomorrow's missions. The aircraft bore scars from dozens of combat operations, but its systems remained reliable because maintenance crews understood the demands that her flying style placed on mechanical components. Next is tomorrow's mission, and the mission after that, and all the missions where American troops need precision air support that might not be available through normal channels. You're going to keep flying combat missions indefinitely. I'm going to keep being the system that works when other systems fail. The philosophy that had guided her from civilian recruit to combat aviation specialist remained unchanged despite official recognition and career advancement opportunities. Her purpose was providing capabilities that protected American lives under conditions where conventional approaches were inadequate. 3 weeks later, she received notification that would test her commitment to that purpose. Pentagon aviation specialists wanted her to participate in advanced training development programs that would incorporate her techniques into official curricula. The assignment would remove her from combat operations, but potentially improve pilot education for future generations. Colonel Stone delivered the notification during a private meeting in her office. "This is a significant honor, Valkyrie. Pentagon attention usually leads to career advancement and eventual command positions. What about combat operations, ma'am? Who covers the missions that require unconventional approaches? Other pilots will adapt your techniques. Your innovations will be taught to Academy students and incorporated into standard training programs." Brindley considered the implications of leaving combat operations for training development. Her techniques could help other pilots, but removing her from frontline missions would eliminate capabilities that were currently unique and potentially irreplaceable. "Ma'am, I respectfully request to remain in combat operations while participating in training development as collateral duty." That's not how Pentagon assignments typically work. They want your full attention focused on program development. "Then I respectfully decline the Pentagon assignment." Colonel Stone looked surprised. Most officers would consider Pentagon attention a career opportunity that couldn't be refused. "You're certain about this decision?" "Yes, ma'am. My training was designed to make me effective in combat operations. That's where I belong." "Very well. I'll convey your decision to higher headquarters." 6 months later, her choice was validated when intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces in Afghanistan had developed new tactics that required immediate adaptation of American air support procedures. The threats were sophisticated and dangerous, pushing pilot capabilities beyond normal training parameters. Valkyrie's call sign was requested specifically for the mission. "We need someone who can operate independently when normal procedures don't work," came the briefing from the Special Operations Command. "Intelligence suggests that enemy forces have acquired advanced surface-to-air missiles and are using tactical innovations that counter standard close air support doctrine." The mission would take her into territory where enemy capabilities exceeded anything previously encountered, requiring adaptations that would test every aspect of her self-taught preparation. Success would validate her decision to remain in combat operations rather than accepting Pentagon training assignments. Failure would likely result in aircraft loss and pilot casualties that would demonstrate the limitations of even exceptional individual capabilities. She accepted the mission with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her approach to impossible challenges throughout her career. Her aircraft was loaded with maximum ammunition and fuel, configured for extended operations in hostile territory where mechanical reliability and pilot skill would determine mission success. The pre-flight briefing revealed tactical complexity that exceeded previous combat operations. Enemy forces possessed sophisticated weapon systems and intelligence capabilities that allowed them to predict and counter American tactical approaches. Standard procedures would likely result in aircraft losses and mission failure. Her approach would need to incorporate every innovation she'd developed during months of self-directed training and combat experience. The mission would require flying techniques, weapons delivery precision, and decision-making capabilities that reflected years of preparation for situations that officially didn't exist. As she walked toward her aircraft for what could be her final mission, Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached with a small wrapped package. "What's this, Sergeant?" "Something from the crew. We figured you should have it before you head out." She unwrapped the package to reveal a small metal plaque designed to mount on her aircraft's instrument panel. The inscription was simple but reflected the philosophy that had guided her entire career. "If the system fails, you become the system." "Thank you, Sergeant. This means everything." "Bring yourself and that bird back home, Captain. We've got more missions that need the Valkyrie touch." She mounted the plaque on her instrument panel where it would be visible during all phases of flight operations. The words would remind her that individual determination could overcome system limitations when lives depended on exceptional performance. Her aircraft lifted off from Kandahar for the final time, carrying innovations that had been developed through self-directed training and validated through months of combat operations. The mission ahead would test whether unofficial preparation could succeed against threats that official programs hadn't anticipated. Radio silence was maintained during transit to the target area, where enemy forces waited with weapons and tactics designed to counter American air power. Her approach would need to avoid detection while positioning her aircraft for precision strikes that would achieve mission objectives without triggering defensive systems. The target area appeared below as a complex tactical puzzle, where enemy positions were protected by advanced air defense systems and human shields. Success would require flying precision that exceeded anything previously attempted, with weapons delivery that neutralized threats while avoiding collateral damage. Her first pass revealed the sophistication of enemy preparations. They'd studied American tactical doctrine and developed countermeasures that rendered standard approaches ineffective. Surface-to-air missile systems were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would destroy aircraft attempting conventional attack profiles. The solution required innovations that combined her self-taught flying techniques with weapons delivery precision that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limits. Each attack run would expose her aircraft to defensive systems designed to kill pilots who followed predictable patterns. Her approach incorporated evasive maneuvers that weren't taught in any training program, using terrain features and timing variations that confused enemy tracking systems. Her weapons delivery was surgically precise, striking only the specific targets that posed threats to American ground forces while avoiding damage to nearby civilian populations. Mission success came at a cost that reflected the extreme nature of threats she'd faced. Her aircraft sustained significant battle damage that required emergency procedures and manual flight control techniques that few pilots could execute. The return flight to base pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond normal operational limits. She landed at Kandahar with systems failing and fuel exhausted, completing a mission that validated every aspect of her unconventional approach to combat aviation. Ground crews rushed to assess battle damage and provide medical evaluation for injuries sustained during the most demanding flight operations of her career. The mission debrief revealed tactical innovations that would influence American air power doctrine for years to come. Her techniques had succeeded against threats that conventional approaches couldn't address, proving that individual preparation and determination could overcome system limitations when properly applied. Pentagon aviation specialists requested detailed analysis of her methods, seeking to understand how self-taught training had produced capabilities that exceeded expensive government programs. Her innovations would be studied and potentially incorporated into official curricula, but with recognition that some aspects of her performance couldn't be replicated through institutional education. Colonel Stone approached during the debrief session with news that would define the next phase of her career. Pentagon has approved a unique assignment that combines combat operations with training development. You'll continue flying missions while developing programs that teach your innovations to other pilots. That sounds like the best of both possibilities, ma'am. It is. And it recognizes that your capabilities are most valuable when applied directly to combat operations rather than removed to institutional assignments. The new assignment allowed her to continue protecting American lives through precision air support, while sharing knowledge that could improve pilot performance across all service branches. Her techniques would be taught to Academy students and experienced pilots who wanted to enhance their capabilities for extreme conditions. Most importantly, she would remain available for missions that required innovations beyond normal training parameters. When official systems were inadequate for protecting American personnel, she would continue being the system that succeeded where others failed. Years later, Captain Brinley Valkyrie Thorne stood before a class of advanced pilot candidates at the United States Air Force Academy, sharing lessons learned from combat operations, where self-taught skills had proved superior to institutional education. Her story had become required reading for aviation students who needed to understand that individual determination could overcome any limitation. The most important lesson, she told her students, is that your education doesn't end when you graduate from official programs. Real learning begins when you take responsibility for developing capabilities that exceed what others believe possible. The classroom was silent as students absorbed wisdom from someone who'd transformed rejection into excellence through personal determination and innovative thinking. Her techniques were now taught as standard curricula, but her example inspired approaches that went beyond any program. Your father's philosophy guided you through everything, one student observed. If the system fails, you become the system. That's exactly right. But remember that becoming the system isn't about ignoring rules or rejecting authority. It's about accepting responsibility for achieving necessary results when conventional approaches are inadequate. After the class concluded, she walked across the academy grounds toward her current aircraft and the A-10C bearing the nose art that had become famous throughout military aviation. Valkyrie, self-taught. The designation represented more than personal achievement. It symbolized the principle that individual determination could overcome any obstacle when properly focused and persistently applied. Her story proved that conventional limitations were often artificial barriers that could be transcended through preparation and courage. Her secure phone activated with notification of another mission, requiring precision air support under extreme conditions. Ground forces needed assistance that conventional doctrine couldn't provide, but her innovations could deliver successful results. This is Valkyrie. I'm available for immediate deployment. Roger, Valkyrie. We need your specific capabilities for a situation that exceeds normal parameters. She smiled as she climbed into her aircraft for another mission where self-taught skills would protect American lives under impossible conditions. Her journey from rejected trainee to combat aviation specialist had validated her father's wisdom about becoming the system when systems failed. The A-10's engines roared to life with familiar power that had carried her through years of operations where individual excellence made the difference between mission success and American casualties. Today's mission would be another opportunity to prove that determination could overcome any limitation. As she taxied toward the runway, her father's words echoed in her memory, with the clarity that came from years of successful application. If the system fails, you become the system. Today, she was the system that brought heroes home alive.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best. See each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.